No, that's fine. We wait for ads. I'm opening your Twitch on my laptop so I can at least see chat this time. Have that open over there. And mute if it's not muted. Because that'll be awkward for the mute site. There we go. English variety streamer, blind playthrough. I mean, it's not really blind. I can refresh. That's ad. Still says blind playthrough. Ceequin Reads, reading, stream ends and stream ending card appears, English, variety streamer, and blind playthrough. Under, beside reading fun, I see English, variety streamer, and blind playthrough. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I've read all of the Narnia. It's just been like over 15 years. I can see. Oh, hot chocolate. It's too hot. Fingers cold. Okay. Ads still going or am I good to start? Okay. The sock puppet is angry. It's happy. Not talking, but only when you are. Wait. No, right, there's a stream delay. I forgot. I'm silly. The next page we're reading, or the next story, is... what are we on? The 4th in the chronological? Because there's the magician's nephew, and the Lion, the Witch, and the horse and his boy. Yeah, so we're on to the 4th one in the chronological presentation. So we're at Prince Caspian. We've gone from 4 viewers to 3 viewers, now to 2 viewers. Nobody's here. Oh, what are all those things? There's like pop-ups with like little squares. I've never actually looked over at the streams. Yeah, those things. Yes, those things. Huh. Weird. Okay, are we good? Still no. Puppet. Puppet is angry at ads. I'm angry at ads. Well, it was fairly perturbed then, fine. When he's angry, you can see like little black notches around his face. Angie. Oh, it is cold. Bonked. Don't bonk me. No bonk. So you excited for Tuesday? We are Sunday. We are the 5th. Oh my gosh, we're doing it in 2 days. Oh my gosh. Oh, warm. I gotta remember to make Dee's lunch for tomorrow. He mostly just requested apple slices and carrots. We don't have grapes. His tummy's still upset. Butcher's Market offer. He didn't even want crackers. No burrito. fingers are cold. One. So sleepy. Okay. Welcome back to Ceequin Reads. Or Ceequin Sunday, whichever. So we finished The Horse and His Boy last week, and we will be starting on the next book in the chronological presentation, not the actual publishing of the Narnia series. This one's titled Prince Caspian. Okay. So we get to see a map. I should have taken a photo of this. Did we want to actually? Do you have your phone? No, it's plugged in because it was dying. Okay. Looks like most of the story is going to be based on Narnia because we get to see the map of Narnia. We get to see Cair Paravel and all that. Aslan's house, Dancing Lawn, Archenland, and the wildlands of the north. Okay. I wonder if the... Oh. Sorry, I got distracted by the map. Okay. To Mary Claire Harvard. Chapter 1. The Island. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. And I gotta take my glasses off. I can't read with those on. And it has been told in another book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe how they had a remarkable adventure. They had opened the door of a magic wardrobe and found themselves in a quite different world from ours, and in that different world they had become kings and queens in a country called Narnia. While they were in Narnia, they seemed to reign for years and years, but when they came back through the door and found themselves in England again, it all seemed to have taken no time at all. At any rate, no one noticed that they had ever been away, and they never told anyone except one very wise grown-up. That had all happened a year ago. Now all 4 of them were sitting on a seat at a railway station, with trunks and play boxes piled round. They were, in fact, on their way back to school. They had travelled together as far as this station, which was a junction, and here, in a few minutes, one train would arrive and take the girls away to one school, and in about half an hour another train would arrive, and the boys would go off to another school. The first part of the journey, when they were all together, always seemed to be part of the holiday. But now, when they would be saying goodbye and going different ways so soon, everyone felt that the holidays were really over, and everyone felt their term time. The holidays were really over, and everyone felt their term time feeling beginning again. Oh, like school terms. Oh, okay. Sorry. And beginning again, and they were all rather gloomy that no one could think of anything to say. Lucy was going to boarding school for the first time. It was an empty, sleepy country station, and there were hardly anyone on platform except themselves. Suddenly Lucy gave a sharp little cry, like someone who had been stung by a wasp. "What's up, Lou?" said Edmund, and then suddenly broke off and made a noise like, "Ow!" "What on earth?" began Peter, and then he too suddenly changed what he had been going to say. Instead he said, "Sue, let's go." "What are you doing? Where are you dragging me to?" "I'm not touching you," said Susan. "Someone is pulling me. Oh, stop it." Everyone noticed that all the others' faces had gone very white. "I felt just the same," said Edmund in a breathless voice, "as if I were being dragged along. Most frightful pulling. Ugh, it's beginning again." "Me too," said Lucy. "Oh, I can't bear it." "Sharp," shouted Edmund. "All catch hands and keep together. This is magic. I can tell by the feeling. Quick." "Yes," said Susan. "Hold hands. Oh, I do wish it would stop. Oh." Next moment, the luggage, the seat, the platform, and the station had completely vanished. The 4 children, holding hands and panting, found themselves standing in a woody place. Such a woody place that branches were sticking into them, and there were hardly room to move. They all rubbed their eyes and took a deep breath. Oh, Peter, exclaimed Lucy, do you think we can possibly have got back to Narnia? It might be anywhere, said Peter. We can't see a yard in all these trees. Let's try and get into the open, if there isn't any open. With some difficulty, and with some stings from nettles and pricks from thorns, they struggled out of the thicket. Then they had another surprise. Everything became much brighter, and after a few steps they found themselves at the edge of a wood, looking down on a sandy beach. A few yards away, a very calm sea was falling on the sand with such tiny ripples that it made hardly any sound. There was no land in sight and no clouds in the sky. The sun was about where it ought to be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the sea was a dazzling blue. They stood sniffing in the sea smell. By Jove, said Peter, this is good enough. 5 minutes later, everyone was barefoot and wading in the cool, clear water. This is better than being in a stuffy train on the way back to Latin and French and algebra, said Edmund. And then for quite a long time there was no more talking, only splashing and looking for shrimps and crabs. All the same, said Susan presently, I suppose we'll have to make some plans. We shall want something to eat before long. We've got the sandwiches Mother gave us for the journey, said Edmund. At least I've got 9. Sorry, mine. Not me, said Lucy. Mine was in my little bag. So were mine, said Susan. Mine are in my coat pocket, there on the beach, said Peter. That'll be 2 lunches among 4. This isn't going to be such fun. At present, said Lucy, I want something to drink more than something to eat. Everyone else now felt thirsty, as one usually is after wading in salt water under a hot sun. It's like being shipwrecked, remarked Edmund. In the books, they always find springs of clear fresh water on the island. We'd better go and look for them. Does that mean we'll have to go back into all that thick wood, said Susan. Not a bit of it, said Peter. If there are streams, they're bound to come down to the sea. And if we walk along the beach, we're bound to come to them. They all now waded back and went first across the smooth, wet sand, and then up to the dry, crumbly sand that sticks to one's toes, and began putting on their shoes and socks. Edmund and Lucy wanted to leave them behind and do their exploring with bare feet, but Susan said this would be a mad thing to do. We might never find them again, she pointed out, and we shall want them if we're still here when night comes and it becomes to be cold. When they were dressed again, they set out along the shore with the sea on their left hand and the wood on their right. Except for an occasional seagull, it was a very quiet place. The wood was so thick and tangled that they could hardly see into it at all, and nothing in it moved, not a bird, not even an insect. Shells and seaweed and anemones on tiny crabs in rock pools are all very well, but you soon get tired of them if you're thirsty. The children's feet, after their change from cool water, felt hot and heavy. Susan and Lucy had raincoats to carry. Edmund had put down his coat on the station seat just before the magic overtook them, and he and Peter took it in turns to carry Peter's greatcoat. Presently, the shore began to curve round to the right. About a quarter of an hour later, after they had crossed a rocky ridge which ran out into a point, it made quite a sharp turn. Their backs were now to part of the sea which had met them when they first came out of the woods, and now, looking ahead, they could see across the water another shore, thickly wooded like the one they were exploring. I wonder, is that an island, or do we join on to it presently? Said Lucy. Don't know, said Peter, and they all plodded on in silence. The shore that they were walking on drew nearer and nearer to the opposite shore, and as they came round each promontory. This is reading with Cathis. It's looks like it's just promontory, but I feel like I should know this word. That one. It's just an odd word.
So we're gonna break it down. I see
promontory, but it just sounds weird.
Promontory. Yeah, promontory. Promontory. Promontory.
It just makes me feel like promenade, but it doesn't. It's not the word. So I apologize. the children expected to find the place where the two joined. But in this, they were... Can you look up the meaning of that word, actually? A high ridge or land of rock jutting out of the water. Does it show how to pronounce it, or does it have one of those listen things? Promontory. Promontory or promontory? Put my glasses back on to see the chat. Promontory. New word. Ugh. And as they came around each promontory, the children expected to find the place where the two joined. But in this, they were disappointed. They came to some rocks which they had to climb, and from the top, they could see a fair way ahead, and... "Oh, bother," said Edmund. "It's no good. We shan't be able to get to those other woods at all. We're on an island." It's true. At this point, the channel between them and the opposite coast was only about 30 or 40 yards wide. They could now see that this was the narrowest place. After that, their own coast bent round to the right again, and they could see open sea between it and the mainland. It was obvious that they had already come much more than halfway around the island. "Look," said Lucy suddenly. "What's that?" She pointed to a long, silvery, snake-like thing that lay across the beach. A stream, shouted the others, and tired as they were, they lost no time in clattering down the rocks and racing to the fresh water. They knew that the stream would be better to drink farther up, away from the beach, so they went at once to the spot where it came out of the wood. The trees were as thick as ever, but the stream had made itself a deep course between high mossy banks, so that by stooping you could follow it up in a sort of tunnel of leaves. They dropped on their knees by the first brown, dimply pool and drank, dipped their faces in the water, and then dipped their arms up to their elbows. "Now," said Edmund, "what about those sandwiches?" "Oh, hadn't we better save them?" said Susan. "We may need them far worse later on." "I do wish," said Lucy, "now that we're not thirsty, we could go on feeling as not hungry as we did when we were thirsty." "What about those sandwiches?" repeated Edmund. "There's no good saving them till they go bad. You've got to remember it's a good deal hotter here than in England, and we've been carrying them about in pockets for hours." So they got out the 2 packets and divided them into 4 portions, and nobody had quite enough, but it was a great deal better than nothing. Then they talked about their plans for the next meal. Lucy wanted to go back to the sea and catch shrimps, until someone pointed out that they had no nets. Edmund said they must gather gulls' eggs from the rocks. When they came to think of it, they couldn't remember having seen any gulls' eggs, and wouldn't be able to cook them if they found any. Peter thought to himself that unless they had some stroke of luck, they should soon be glad to eat eggs raw, but he didn't see any point in saying this out loud. Susan said it was a pity that they'd eaten the sandwiches so soon. 1 or 2 tempers very nearly got lost at this stage. Finally, Edmund said, "Look here. There's only one thing to be done. We must explore the wood. Hermits and knights-errant and people like that always manage to live somehow if they're in a forest. They find roots and berries and things." "What sort of roots?" asked Susan. "I always thought it meant roots of trees," said Lucy. "Come on," said Peter. "Ed is right, and we must try to do something. And it'll be better than going out into the glare in the sun again." So they all got up and began to follow the stream. It was very hard work. They had to stoop under branches and climb over branches, and they blundered through great masses of stuff like rhododendrons that tore their clothes and got their feet wet in the stream. And still there was no noise at all, except for the noise of the stream and the noises they were making themselves. They were beginning to get very tired of it when they noticed a delicious smell, and then a flash of bright color high above them in the top of the right bank. "I say," exclaimed Lucy, "I do believe that's an apple tree." It was. They panted up the steep bank, forced their way through some brambles, and found themselves standing round an old tree that was heavy with large yellowish golden apples, as firm and juicy as you could wish to see. "And this is not the only tree," said Edmund, with his mouth full of apple. "Look there, and there." "Why, there are dozens of them," said Susan, throwing away the core of her first apple and picking her second. "There must have been an orchard long, long ago, before this place went wild and the wood grew up." "Then this was once an inhabited island," said Peter. "And what's that?" said Lucy, pointing ahead. "By Jove, it's a wall," said said Peter. An old stone wall. Pressing their way between the laden branches, they reached the wall. It was very old and broken down in places, with moss and wildflowers growing on it, but it was higher than all but the tallest trees. And when they came quite close to it, they found a great arch which once must have had a gate in it, but was now almost filled up with the largest of all the apple trees. They had to break some of the branches to get past, and when they had done so, they all blinked because the daylight became suddenly much brighter. They found themselves in a wide open place with walls all round it. In here, there were no trees, only level grass and daisies and ivy and gray walls. It was a bright, secret, quiet place, and rather sad. And all four stepped out into the middle of it, glad to be able to straighten their backs and move their limbs freely. Chapter 2: The Ancient Treasure House. This wasn't a garden, said Susan presently. It was a castle. And this... One moment, sorry. It was a castle, and this must have been the courtyard. I see what you mean, said Peter. Yes, this is the remains of a tower, and there is what used to be a flight of steps going up to the top of the walls. And look at those other steps, the broad, shallow ones, going up to that doorway. It must have been the door into the greater hall. Ages ago, by the looks of it, said Edmund. Yes, ages ago, said Peter. I wish we could find out who the people were that lived in this castle, and how long ago. It gives me a queer feeling, said Lucy. Does it, Lou? Said Peter, turning and looking hard at her, because it does the same to me. It's the queerest thing that has happened this queer day. I wonder where we are and what it all means. While they were talking, they had crossed the courtyard and gone through the other doorway into what had once been the hall. This was now very much like the courtyard. The roof... Sorry, I'm hearing noise out there. For the roof had long since disappeared, and it was merely another space of grass and daisies, except that it was shorter and narrower, and the walls were higher. Across the far end, there was a kind of terrace about 3 feet higher than the rest. I wonder, was it really the hall? I'll pause. You're feeling... I wonder, was it really the hall? Said Susan. What is that terrace kind of thing? Why, you silly, said Peter, who had become strangely excited. Don't you see? That was the dais where the high table was, where the king and the great lords sat. Anyone would think you had forgotten that we ourselves were once kings and queens, and sat on a dais just like that, in our great hall. In our castle at Cair Paravel, continued Susan, in a dreamy and rather sing-song voice. At the mouth of the great river of Narnia. How could I forget? How it all comes back, said Lucy. We could pretend we were in Cair Paravel now. This hall must have been very hot, very like the great hall we feasted in. But unfortunately, without the feast, said Edmund. It's getting late, you know. Look how long the shadows are. And have you noticed that it isn't so hot? We shall need a campfire if we've got to spend the night here, said Peter. We've got matches. Let's go and see if we can collect some dry wood. Everyone saw the sense of this, and for the next half hour they were busy. The orchard through which they had first come into the ruins turned out not to be a good place for firewood. They tried the other side of the castle, passing out of the hall by a little side door into a maze of stony humps and hollows, which must once have been passages and smaller rooms, but was now all nettles and wild roses. Beyond this, they found a wide gap in the castle wall and stepped through it into a wood of darker and bigger trees, which they found dead branches and rotten wood and sticks and dry leaves and fir cones in plenty. They went to and fro with bundles until they had a good pile in the dais. At the 5th journey, they found the well, just outside the hall, hidden in weeds, but clean and fresh and deep when they had cleared these away. The remains of a stone pavement. Oh, one moment. Sorry about that. Do feasts, orchard, bigger trees, dais, the well. Clean, fresh, and deep when they had cleared these away. The remains of a stone pavement ran halfway round it. Then the girls went out to pick some more apples, and the boys built the fire, on the dais and fairly close to the corner between two walls, which they thought would be as the snuggest and warmest place. They had great difficulty in lighting it, and used a lot of matches, but they succeeded in the end. Finally, all four sat down with their backs to the wall and their faces to the fire. They tried roasting some of the apples on the ends of sticks, but roast apples are not much good without sugar, and they are too hot to eat with your fingers till they are too cold to be worth eating. So they had to content themselves with raw apples, which, as Edmund said, made one realize that school suppers weren't so bad after all. I shouldn't mind a good thick slice of bread and margarine this moment, he added. But the spirit of adventure was rising in them all, and no one really wanted to be back at school. Shortly after the last apple had been eaten, Susan went out to the well to get another drink. When she came back, she was carrying something in her hand. "Look," she said in a rather choking kind of voice. "I found it by the well." Oh my gosh. The misspelling. Hold on. Do you have your phone? This is what I mean. Okay, I guess I could type it out. The section in this book, this is not the best published version of the series, and they've got a misspelling that I'm very interested in. So instead of saying, oh, I'm not typing. So. This is how they spelled well. Can you see the difference? Yep, there's one exclamation mark, then another L. Normally I gloss over the misspellings, but that one was so bizarre to me. So I'm not sure if she's supposed to be distressed and loud, like, "I found it by the well," or if she's supposed to be quiet, "I found it by the well." Because I don't know if that exclamation mark is supposed to be at the end or if it's just a mistype. I found it at the wheel. She handed it to Peter and sat down. The others thought she looked and sounded as if she might be going to cry. Edmund and Lucy eagerly bent forward to see what was in Peter's hand, a little bright thing that gleamed in the firelight. "Well, I'm jiggered," said Peter, and his voice also sounded queer. Then he handed it to the others. All now saw what it was, a little chess knight, ordinary in size, but extraordinarily heavy because it was made of pure gold, and the eyes in that horse's head were two tiny little rubies, or rather one was, for the other had been knocked out. "Why," said Lucy, "it's exactly like the one of the golden chessmen we used to play with when we were kings and queens at Cair Paravel." "Cheer up, Sue," said Peter to his other sister. "Can't help it," said Susan. "It brought back, oh, such lovely times. And I remembered playing chess with fauns and good giants, and the mer people singing in the sea, and my beautiful horse, and... "Now," said Peter in a quite different voice, "it's about time we four started using our brains." "What about?" asked Edmund. "Have none of you guessed where we are?" said Peter. Go on," said Lucy. "I felt for hours that there was some wonderful mystery hanging over this place." "Fire ahead, Peter," said Edmund. "We're all listening." "We are in the ruins of Cair Paravel itself," said Peter. "But I say," replied Edmund, "I mean, how do you make that out? This place has been ruined for ages. Look at all those big trees growing right up to the gates. Look at the very stones. Anyone can see nobody's lived here for hundreds of years." "I know," said Peter. "That is the difficulty." But let's leave that out for the moment. I want to take to the points one by one. First point. This hall is exactly the same shape and size as the hall at Cair Paravel. Just picture a roof on this, and a colored pavement instead of grass, and tapestries on the walls, and you get our royal banqueting hall. No one said anything. Second point, continued Peter. The castle well is exactly where our well was, a little to the south of the great hall, and it is exactly the same size and shape. Again, there was no reply. Third point, Susan has just found one of our old chessmen, or something as like one of them as 2 peas. Still nobody answered. Fourth point, don't you remember? It was the very day before ambassadors came from the king of Calormen. Don't you remember? Planting the orchard outside the north gate at Cair Paravel. Greatest of all the wood people, Pomona herself came to put good spells on it. It was those very decent little chaps, the moles, who did the actual digging. Can you have forgotten that funny old Lily Gloves? The chief mole leaning on his spade and saying, "Believe me, your majesty, you'll be glad of these fruit trees one day." By Jove, he was right. I do, said Lucy, clapping her hands. But look here, Peter, said Edmund. That must all be rot. To begin with, we didn't plant the orchard slap up against the gate. We wouldn't have been such fools. No, of course not, said Peter, but it has grown up to the gate since. And for another thing, said Edmund, Cair Paravel wasn't on an island. Yes, I've been wondering about that. But it was a, what do you call it, a peninsula? Jolly nearly an island. Couldn't have been made an island since our times. Somebody's dug a channel. But half a moment, said Edmund. You keep on saying since our time, but it's only a year ago since we came back from Narnia, and you want to make out that in 1 year castles have fallen down, and great forests have grown up, and little trees we saw planted ourselves have turned into a big old orchard, and goodness knows what else. It's all impossible. There's one thing, said Lucy. If this is Cair Paravel, there ought to be a door at this end of the dais. In fact, we ought to be sitting with our backs against it at this moment. You know, the door that led up and down to the treasure chamber. I suppose there isn't a door, said Peter, getting up. The wall behind them was a mass of ivy. You can soon find out, said Edmund, taking up one of the sticks that they had laid ready for putting on the fire. He began beating the ivied wall. Tap, tap, tap went the stick against the stone, and again tap, 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 and then all of a sudden, boom, boom, with a quite different sound, a hollow, wooden sound. Great Scott, said Edmund. We must clear this ivy away, said Peter. Oh, let's leave it alone, said Susan. We can try it in the morning. If we've got to spend the night here, I don't want an open door at my back. And a great big black hole that anyone might come out of. Besides, the draft and the damp, and besides the draft and the damp, and it'll soon be dark. Susan, how can you? Said Lucy with a reproachful glance, but both the boys were too much excited to take any notice of Susan's advice. They worked at the ivy with their hands, and with Peter's pocket knife, the knife broke. It did it again. There's an exclamation mark instead of an I. After that, they used Edmund's. Soon, the whole place, turn the page, where they had been sitting was covered with ivy, and at last they had the door cleared. Locked, of course, said Peter. But the wood's all rotten, said Edmund. We can pull it in 2 bits, no time, and it will make extra firewood. Come on. It took them longer than they expected, and before they were done, the great hall had grown dusky, and the first star or two had come out overhead. Susan was not the only one who felt a slight shudder as the boys stood above the pile of splintered wood, rubbing the dirt off their hands, and staring into the cold, dark opening they had made. Now for a torch, said Peter. Oh, what is the good, said Susan, and as Edmund said. I'm not saying it now, Edmund interrupted. I still don't understand, but we can settle that later. I suppose you're coming down, Peter? We must, said Peter. Cheer up, Susan. It's no good behaving like kids now that we're back in Narnia. You're a queen here. And anyway, no one could go to sleep with a mystery like this on their minds. They tried to use long sticks as torches, but this was not a success. If you held them with the lighted end up, they went out, and if you held them the other way, they scorched your hand, and the smoke got in your eyes. In the end, they had to use Edmund's electric torch. Luckily, it had been a birthday present less than a week ago, and the battery was almost new. He went first with the light. Then came Lucy, then Susan, and Peter brought up the rear. "I've come to the top of the steps," said Edmund. "Count them," said Peter. "1, 2, 3, said Edmund as he went cautiously down, and so up to 16. "And this is the bottom," he shouted back. Then it really must be Paravel," said Lucy. "There were 16. Nothing more was said till all four were standing in a knot together at the foot of the stairway. Then Edmund flashed his torch round slowly. "Oh," said all the children at once, for now all knew that it was indeed the ancient treasure chamber of Paravel, where they had once reigned as kings and queens of Narnia. There was a kind of path in the middle, as it might be in a greenhouse, and along each side at intervals stood rich suits of armor, like knights guarding the treasures. In between the suits of armor, and on each side of the path, were shelves covered with precious things, necklaces and arm rings, finger rings, and golden bowls and dishes, and long tusks of ivory, brooches and coronets and chains of gold, and heaps of unset stones lying piled anyhow, as if they were marbles or potatoes, diamonds, rubies, carbuncles, emeralds, topazes, amethysts. Under the shelves stood great chests of oak, strengthened with iron bars and heavily padlocked, and it was bitterly cold, and so still that they could hear themselves breathing. And the treasures were so covered with dust that unless they had realized where they were and remembered most of the things, they would hardly have known they were treasures. There was something sad and a little frightening about the place, because it all seemed so forsaken and long ago. That was why nobody said anything for at least a minute. Then, of course, they began walking about and picking things up to look. It was like meeting very old friends. If you had been there, you would have heard them saying things like, "Oh, look, our coronation rings. Do you remember the first wearing them? Why, this is the little brooch we all thought we lost. I say, isn't that the armor you wore at the great tournament on the Lone Island? Do you remember the dwarf making that for me? Do you remember drinking out of that horn? Do you remember? But suddenly Edmund said, "Look here, we mustn't waste the battery. Goodness knows how often we shall need it. Hadn't we better take what we want and get out again?" "We must take the gifts," said Peter. For long ago, at a Christmas in Narnia, he and Susan and Lucy had been given certain presents which they valued more than their whole kingdom. Edmund had no gift because he was not with them at the time. This was his own fault, and you can read about it in the other book. They all agreed with Peter and walked up the path to the wall at the far end of the treasure chamber, and there, sure enough, the gifts were all still hanging. Lucy's was the smallest, for it was only a little bottle, but the bottle was made of diamond instead of glass, and it was still more than half full of the magical cordial, which would heal almost every wound and every illness. Lucy said nothing and looked very solemn as she took her gift down from its place and slung the belt over her shoulder, and once more felt the bottle at her side where it used to hang in the old days. Susan's gift had been a bow and arrows and a horn. The bow was still there, and the ivory quiver full of well-feathered arrows, but "Oh, Susan," said Lucy, "where's the horn?" "Oh, bother," said Susan, after she had thought for a moment. "I remember now. I took it with me the last day of all, the day we went hunting the white stag. It must have got lost when we blundered back into the other place. England, I mean." Edmund whistled. It was indeed a shattering loss, for this was an enchanted horn, and whenever you blew it, help was certain to come to you, wherever you were. Oh. "Just the sort of thing that might come in handy in a place like this," said Edmund. "Never mind," said Susan. "I've still got the bow," and she took it. "Won't the string be perished, Sue?" said Peter. Whether by some magic in the air of the treasure chamber or not, the bow was still in working order. Archery and swimming were the things Susan was good at. In a moment she had bent the bow, and then she gave one little pluck of the string. It twanged, a chirping twang that vibrated through the whole room. And that one small noise brought back the old days to the children's minds more than anything that had happened yet. All the battles and hunts and feasts came rushing into their heads together. Then she unstrung the bow again and slung the quiver at her side. Next, Peter took down his gift, the shield with a great red lion on it, and the royal sword. He blew and rapped them on the floor to get off the dust. He fitted the shield on his arm and slung the sword by his side. He was afraid at first that it might be rusty and stick to the sheath, but it was not so. With one swift motion, he drew it and held it up, shining in the torchlight. "It is my sword, Rindon," he said. "With it I killed the wolf." There was a new tone in his voice, and the others all felt that he was really Peter the High King again. Then, after a little pause, everyone remembered that they must save the battery. They climbed the stairs again and made up a good fire and lay down close together for warmth. The ground was very hard and uncomfortable. They fell asleep in the end. Chapter 3. The Dwarf. The worst of sleeping out of doors is that you wake up so dreadfully early. And when you wake up, you have to get up because the ground is so hard that you are uncomfortable. And it makes matters worse if there is nothing but apples for breakfast, and you've had nothing but apples for supper the night before. When Lucy had said, truly enough, that it was a glorious morning, there did not seem to be anything else nice to be said. Edmund said what everyone was feeling. "We simply got to get off this island." When they had drunk from the well and splashed their faces, they all went down the stream again to the shore and stared at the channel which divided them from the mainland. I feel like they should have brought some coins. Like, if they're going out into the world, maybe some currency would be nice. No, they're children. And considering the kings and queens of Narnia have always had whatever they wanted without having to pay for it, what need would they have ever have had to think about the practicalities of having some spending money? They all went down to the stream again, to the shore, and stared out at the channel which divided them from the mainland. "We'll have to swim," said Edmund. "It would be all right for Sue," said Peter. Susan had won prizes for swimming at school. "But I don't know about the rest of us." By the rest of us, he really meant Edmund, who couldn't yet do 2 lengths of the school baths, and Lucy, who could hardly swim at all. "Anyway," said Susan, "there may be currents. Father says it's never wise to bathe in a place you don't know." "But Peter," said Lucy, "look here. I know I can't swim for nuts at home, in England, I mean. But couldn't we all swim long ago? It was long ago when we were kings and queens in Narnia. We could ride then too, and do all sorts of things, don't you think?" "Ah, but we were sort of grown up then," said Peter. "We reigned for years and years and learned to do things. Aren't we just back at our proper ages again now?" "Oh," said Edmund in a voice which made everyone stop talking and listen to him. "I've just seen it all," he said. "Seen what?" asked Peter. "Why, the whole thing," said Edmund. "You know what we were puzzling about last night? That it was only a year ago since we left Narnia, but everything looks as if no one had lived in Caraparville for hundreds of years. Well, don't you see? We know that. We know that however long we seem to have lived in Narnia, when we got back through the wardrobe, it seemed to have taken no time at all." "Go on," said Susan. "I think I'm beginning to understand." "And that means," continued Edmund, "that once you're out of Narnia, you have no idea how Narnia time is going. Why shouldn't hundreds of years have gone past in Narnia, while only 1 year has passed by for us in England?" "By Jove, Ed," said Peter, "I believe you've got it. In that sense, it really was hundreds of years that we lived in Cair and now we're coming back to Narnia, just as if we were Crusaders or Anglo-Saxons on ancient Britain, or someone coming back to modern England." "How excited they'll be to see us," began Lucy, but at the same time everyone else said, "Hush," or "Look," for now something was happening. There was a wooded point on the mainland a little to the right, and they all felt sure that just beyond that point must be the mouth of the river, and now, round that point, there came into sight a boat. When it had cleared the point, it turned and began coming along the channel towards them. There were 2 people on board, one rowing and the other sitting in the stern and holding a bundle that twitched and moved as if it were alive. Both these people seemed to be soldiers. They had steel caps on their heads and light shirts of chainmail. Their faces were bearded and hard. The children drew back from the beach into the woods and watched without moving a finger. "This'll do," said the soldier in the stern when the boat had come about the opposite. "Oh my gosh," said the soldier in the stern when the boat had come about opposite to them. "What about trying a stone to his feet, Corporal?" said the other, resting on his oars. "Garn," growled the other. "We don't need that, and we haven't brought one. He'll drown sure enough without a stone, as long as we've tied the cords right." With these words, he rose and lifted his bundle. Peter now saw that it was really alive. It was in fact a dwarf, bound hand and foot, but struggling as hard as he could. Next moment he heard a twang just beside his ear, and all at once the soldier threw up his arms, dropping the dwarf into the bottom of the boat, and fell over into the water. He floundered away to the far bank, and Peter knew that Susan's arrow had struck his helmet. He turned and saw that she was very pale, but was already fitting a second arrow to the string. It was never used. As soon as he saw his companion fall, the other soldier, with a loud cry, jumped out of the boat onto the far side, and he also floundered through the water, which was apparently just in his depth, and disappeared into the woods of the mainland. "Quick, before she drifts!" shouted Peter. He and Susan, fully dressed as they were, plunged in, and before the water was up to their shoulders, their hands were on the side of the boat. In a few seconds they had hauled her back to the bank and lifted the dwarf out. And Edmund was busily engaging in cutting the bonds with his pocket knife. Peter's sword would have been sharper, but a sword is very inconvenient for that sort of work because you can't hold it anywhere lower than the hilt. When at last the dwarf was free, he sat up, rubbed his arms and legs, and exclaimed, "Oh, whatever you say, you don't feel like ghosts." Like most dwarves, he was very stocky and deep-chested. He would have been about 3 feet high if he had been standing up, an immense beard and whiskers and coarse red hair left little of his face to be seen, except a beak-like nose and twinkling black eyes. "Anyway," he continued, "ghosts or not, you saved me life, and I'm extremely obliged to you." "But why should we be ghosts?" asked Lucy. "I've been told all my life," said the dwarf, "that these woods along the shore are full of ghosts as they were of trees. That's where the story is. And that's why, when they want to get rid of anyone, they usually bring him down here, like they were doing with me, and say they'll leave him to the ghosts. But I always wondered if they didn't really drown him or cut their throats. I never quite believed in the ghosts. Those two cowards you've just shot believed all right. They were more frightened of taking me to my death than I was of going." "Oh," said Susan, "so that's why they both ran away." "Eh, what's that?" said the dwarf. "They got away," said Edmund, "to the mainland." "I wasn't shooting to kill, you know," said Susan. Oh my gosh. She would not have liked anyone to think she could miss at such short range. Said the dwarf. "It's not so good. It might mean trouble later on, unless they hold their tongues for their own sakes." What were they going to drown you for?" asked Peter. "Oh, I'm a dangerous criminal, I am," said the dwarf cheerfully. "But that's a long story. Meantime, I was wondering if perhaps you were going to ask me to breakfast. You've no idea what an appetite it gives one, being executed." "There's only apples," said Lucy dolefully. "Better than nothing, but not so good as fresh fish," said the dwarf. "It looks as if I'll have to ask you to breakfast instead. I saw some fishing tackle in that boat. And anyway, we must take her around to the other side of the island. We don't want anyone from the mainland coming down and seeing her." "I ought to have thought of that myself," said Peter. The 4 children and the dwarf went down to the water's edge, pushed off the boat with some difficulty, and scrambled aboard. The dwarf at once took charge. The oars were all, of course, too big for him to use, so Peter rowed and the dwarf steered them north along the channel, and presently eastward round to the tip of the island. From here, the children could see right up the river, and all the bays and headlands of the coast beyond it. They thought they could recognize bits of it, but the woods which had grown up since their time made everything look very different. When they had come round into open sea on the east side of the island, the dwarf took to fishing. They had an excellent catch of avenders, a beautiful rainbow-colored fish, which they all remembered eating in Cair Paravel in the old days. When they had caught enough, they ran the boat up into a little creek and moored her to a tree. The dwarf, who was a most capable person, and indeed, though one meets bad dwarves, I've never heard of a dwarf who was a fool, cut the fish open, cleaned them, and said, Now what we want next is some firewood." "We've got some up at the castle," said Edmund. The dwarf gave a low whistle. Beards and bedsteads, he said. So there really is a castle after all. It's only a ruin, said Lucy. The dwarf stared round at all four of them in a very curious expression on his face. And who on earth, he began, but then broke off and said, no matter. Breakfast first, but one thing before we go on. Can you lay your hand on your hearts and tell me I'm really alive? Are you sure I wasn't drowned and we're not all ghosts together? When they had all reassured him, the next question was how to carry the fish. They all said they all had nothing to string them on and had no basket. They had to use Edmund's hat in the end because no one else had a hat. He would have made much more of a fuss about them if he had not by now been so ravenously hungry. At first the dwarf did not seem very comfortable in the castle. He kept looking around and sniffing and saying, looks a bit spooky after all, smells like ghosts too. But he cheered up when it came to lighting the fire and showing them how to roast the fish pavenders in the embers. Eating hot fish with no forks and one pocket knife between 5 people is a messy business, and there were several burnt fingers before the meal was ended. But as it was now 9 o'clock and they had been up since 5, nobody minded the burns so much as you might have expected. When everyone had finished off with a drink from the well and an apple or so, the dwarf produced a pipe from about the size of his own arm, filled it, lit it, blew a grey cloud of fragrant smoke, and said, Now. You tell us your story first, said Peter, and then we'll tell you ours. Well, said the dwarf, as you've saved my life, it is only fair you should have your own way. But I hardly know where to begin. First of all, I'm a messenger of King Caspian's. Who's he? All 4 voices asked 4 voices all at once. Caspian the 10th, King of Narnia. Long may he reign, answered the dwarf. That is to say, he ought to be King of Narnia, and we hope he will be. At present, he is only king of us old Narnians. What do you mean by old Narnians, please? Asked Lucy. Why, there's us, said the dwarf. We're kind of a rebellion, of course, I suppose. I see, said Peter. And Caspian is the chief old Narnian? Well, in a manner of speaking, said the dwarf, scratching his head. But he's really a new Narnian himself, a Telemarin, if you follow me. I don't, said Edmund. It's worse than the Wars of the Rose, said Lucy. Oh dear, said the dwarf. I'm doing this very badly. Look here. I think I'll have to go right back to the beginning and tell you how Caspian grew up in his uncle's court, and how he came to be on our side and all. But it'll be a long story. All the better, said Lucy. We love stories. So the dwarf settled down and he told his tale. I shall not give it to you in his words, putting in all the children's questions and interruptions, because it would take too long and be confusing, and even so, it would leave out some points that the children only heard later. But the gist of the story, as you know it in the end, was as follows. Are we close to ad break? Okay. I will read 8 minutes worth. So this will be chapter 4, The Dwarf Tells of Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian lived in a great castle in the center of Narnia with his uncle, Miraz, the king of Narnia, and his aunt, who had red hair and was called Pruna Prismia, sorry. His father and mother were dead, and the person whom Caspian loved best was his nurse, and though, being a prince, he had wonderful toys which would do almost anything but talk, he liked best the last hour of the day when the toys had all been put back in their cupboards and the nurse would tell him stories. He did not care much for his uncle and aunt, but about twice a week his uncle would send for him, and they would walk up and down together for half an hour on the terrace of the south side of the castle. One day, while they were doing this, the king said to him, Oh boy, we must soon teach you to ride and use a sword. You know that your aunt and I have no children, so it looks as if you'll have to be king. I am gone. How should you like that, eh? I don't know, uncle, said Caspian. Don't know, eh, said Miraz. Why, I should like to know what more anyone could wish for. All the same, I do wish, said Caspian. What do you wish? Asked the king. I wish, I'm sorry. I wish I could have lived in the old days, said Caspian. He was only a very little boy at the time. Up till now, King Miraz had been talking in the tiresome way that some grown-ups have, which makes it quite clear that they are not really interested in what you're saying. But now he suddenly gave Caspian a very sharp look. Hey, what's that? He said. What old days do you mean? Oh, Don't you know, Uncle, said Caspian, when everything was quite different, when all the animals could talk, and there were nice people who lived in the streams and the trees, naiads and dryads they were called, and there were dwarves, and there were lovely little fauns in all the woods. They all had feet like goats, and it's all nonsense for babies, said the king sternly. Only fit for babies, do you hear? You're getting too old for that sort of stuff. At your age, you ought to be thinking of battles and adventure, not fairy tales. Has it been 8 minutes? Okay. Wow. Oh, but there were battles and adventures in those days, said Caspian. Wonderful adventures. Once there was a white witch, and she made herself queen of the whole country, and she made it so that it was always winter. And then 2 boys and 2 girls came from somewhere, and so they killed the witch, and they were made kings and queens of Narnia, and their names were Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy, and so they reigned forever, so long, and everyone had a lovely time, and it was all because of Aslan. Who's he? Said Miraz, as if Caspian had been a very little, and if Caspian had been a very little older. The tone of his uncle's voice would have warned him that it would be wiser to shut up, but he babbled on. Oh, don't you know, he said, Aslan is the great lion who comes from over the sea. Who has been telling you all this nonsense? Said the king in a voice of thunder. Caspian was frightened and said nothing. Your Royal Highness, said King Miraz, letting go of Caspian's hand, which he had been holding till now, I insist upon being answered. Look me in the face. Who has been telling you this pack of lies? Nurse, faltered Caspian, and burst into tears. Stop that noise, said his uncle, taking Caspian by the shoulder and giving him a shake. Stop it, and never let me catch you talking or thinking either about all those silly stories again. There never were those kings and queens. How could there be 2 kings at the same time? And there's no such person as Aslan. And there are no such things as lions. Excuse me? And there never was a time when animals could talk. Do you hear? Yes, uncle, sobbed Caspian. Then let's have no more of it, said the king. And he called to one of the gentlemen in waiting, who were standing at the far side of the terrace, and said in a cold voice, Conduct his Royal Highness to his apartments, and send his Royal Highness's nurse to me at once. Next day, Caspian found what a terrible thing he had done, for a nurse had been sent away without ever being allowed to say goodbye to him, and he was told he would have a tutor, or he was to have a tutor. Caspian missed his nurse very much, and shed many tears, and because he was so miserable, he thought about the old stories of Narnia far more than before. He dreamed of dwarves and dryads every night, and tried very hard to make the dogs and cats in the castle talk to him, but the dogs only wagged their tails, and the cats only purred. Caspian felt sure that he would hate the new tutor, but when the new tutor arrived about a week later, he turned out to be a sort of person it is almost impossible not to like. He was the smallest and also the fattest man Caspian had ever seen. He had a long, silvery, pointed beard which came down to his waist, and his face, which was brown and covered with wrinkles, looked very wise, very ugly, very kind. His voice was grave and his eyes were merry, so that until you got to know him really well, it was hard to know when he was joking and when he was serious. His name was Dr. Cornelius. Is Cornelius the name of that guy from the... I gotta check this. Okay. Do you think he went through to Narnia? I'm confused. Okay. Oh, you're saying Diggory was the guy in the... I was talking about the old man at the pond, when the horse and his boy traveled across the desert. Is it ads yet? Oh, I'll check that out in a minute. Of all his lessons with Dr. Cornelius, the one that Caspian liked best was history. Up till now, except for Narnia stories, he had known nothing about the history of Narnia. He was very surprised to learn that the royal family were newcomers to the country. It was your highness's ancestor, Caspian the First, said Dr. Cornelius, who first conquered Narnia and made it his kingdom. It was he who brought all your nation into the country. You are not native Narnians at all. You are Telmarines, that is. All you came from the land of Telmar, far beyond the western mountains. That is why Caspian the First is called Caspian the Conqueror. Please, doctor, asked Caspian one day, who lived in Narnia before we all came here out of Telmar? No men. or very few, lived in Narnia before the Telmarines took it, said Dr. Cornelius. And who did my great-great-grandcestors conquer? Whom, not who, your highness, said Dr. Cornelius. Perhaps it is time to turn from history to grammar. Oh, please, not yet, said Caspian. I mean, wasn't there a battle? Why is he called Caspian the Conqueror if there is nobody to fight with him? He said there were very few men in Narnia, said the doctor, looking at the boy very strangely through his great spectacles. For a moment, Caspian was puzzled, and then suddenly his heart gave a leap. Do you mean, he gasped, that there were other things? Do you mean it was like in the stories? Were there... Hush, said Dr. Cornelius, laying his head very close to Caspian's. Not a word more. Don't you know your nurse was sent away for telling you about old Narnia? Oops, sorry. The king doesn't like it. If he found me telling you secrets, you'd be whipped, and I should have my head cut off. There's a good pause. I got an itch. I'm sorry. I got an itch. The couch poked me. Yeah. Okay. Now I want to go back to the horses, boy, and see if I can spot that section where Shasta and them... Yeah. Narnia must go. You think? That's the voice. Welcome, fellow traveler. The Hermit of the Southern March. Written hours. They call him Old Man Hermit, but I don't see a name. Yeah, they just call him the Hermit. Maybe a description. Tall man. Okay, not then. Because they said that the Dr. Cornelius was short and round. The hermit is being described as tall, so maybe they could change in weight, but they're definitely not going to change in height. Maybe. Well, then I'm given the wrong accent. We're gonna find out. Old dwarf. You become young dwarf when leave castle. He cosplay as old man. I was actually young this whole time. Oh, yeah, no. I just dyed it. I made it white. Right? I feel like there was a thing somewhere where someone was like thinking it was a fake mustache. They literally ripped their mustache off. Cause like it's like ripping hair out. If you can do it, it hurts. Oh.
It was a fake one. You rip it off.
Rough. It's like, ouch. Oh, and the other thing too is like I remember there being a different show where the person was wearing a fake mustache, but it was so well glued to their face that it looked like they actually ripped their mustache off. Like when the fake mustache looks like, and it left like a really, really bad sore red patch too, because like Yeah, you like took a little bit of skin with it. That's how good it was glued on. So I feel like that would be a really good disguise because they'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were just wearing a mustache." And then it's like actually rips it off their face. I don't know. I want to see how far in this book we've gotten already. How far does Prince Caspian story go? Decently far. Probably get through a quarter of it today. What's that noise we say? That's not what that alarm was for. You can't fool me. Okay. So, yes, Cornelius is not the dwarf and he is not the old hermit from earlier. He is a new person. Not all old men are the same. It's Ceequin to you. Let's see. Uh, do, 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 do. Cut my head off. But why? Asked Caspian. It is high time we turn to grammar now, said Dr. Cornelius in a loud voice. Will your Royal Highness be pleased to open... Maybe I need to take some grammar lessons. Pull... I can do this. Give me a second to read this in my head. Pulverulentus. Pulverulentus siccus. Okay. Pleased to open Pulverulentus siccus at the 4th page on his grammatical garden, or the arbor of accidents pleasantile opened to tender wits. After that, it was all nouns and verbs till lunchtime, but I don't think Caspian learned much. He was too excited. He felt sure that Dr. Cornelius would not have said so much unless he meant to tell him more sooner or later. In this, he was not disappointed. A few days later, his tutor said, Tonight I am going to give you a lesson in astronomy. At the dead of night, 2 noble planets, Tarva and Alambil, will pass within 1 degree of each other. Such a conjunction has not occurred 200 years. Your Highness will not live to see it again. It will be best if you go to bed a little earlier. When the time of the conjunction draws near, I will come and wake you. This didn't seem to have anything to do with old Narnia, which was what Caspian really wanted to hear about. But getting up in the middle of the night is always interesting, and he was moderately pleased. When he went to bed that night, he thought at first he would not be able to sleep, but he soon dropped off and seemed only a few minutes before he felt someone gently shaking him. He sat up in bed and saw that the room was full of moonlight. Dr. Cornelius, muffled in a hooded robe and holding a small lamp in his hand, stood by the bedside. Caspian remembered at once what they were going to do. He got up and put on some clothes. Although it was a summer night, he felt colder than he had been expecting, and was quite glad when the doctor wrapped him in a robe like his own and gave him a pair of warm, soft buckskins for his feet. A moment later, both muffled so that they could hardly be seen in the dark corridors. This is creepy. About to kidnap a prince. And both shod so that they made almost no noise, master and pupil left the room. Caspian followed the doctor through many passages and up several staircases, and at last, through a little door in a turret, they came out upon the leads. On one side were the battlements, on the other side a steep roof. Below them, all shadowy and shimmery, the castle gardens. Above them, stars and moon. Presently they came to another door, which led into the great central tower of the whole castle. Dr. Cornelius unlocked it, and they began to climb the dark, winding stair of the tower. Caspian was becoming excited. He had never been allowed up this stair before. It was long and steep, but when they came out on the roof of the tower, Caspian had got his breath. He felt that it had been well worth it. Away on his right he could see, rather indistinctly, the western mountains. On his left was the gleam of the great river, and everything was so quiet that he could hear the sounds of the waterfall at Beaver Dam, a mile away. There was no difficulty in picking up the 2 stars they had come to see. They hung rather low in the southern sky, almost as bright as 2 little moons, and very close together. Are they going to have a collision? He asked in an awestruck voice. Nay, dear prince, said the doctor. And he too spoke in a whisper. Great lords of the upper sky know the steps of their dance too well for that. Look well upon them. Their meeting is fortunate and means some great good for the sad realm of Narnia. Tarva, the Lord of Victory, salutes Alambil, the Lady of Peace. They are just coming to their nearest. It's a pity the trees get in the way, said Caspian. We'd really see better from the West Tower, though. It's not so high. So the West Tower, though it's not so high. Dr. Cornelius said nothing for about 2 minutes, but stood still with his eyes fixed on Tarva and Alambi. Then he drew a deep breath and turned to Caspian. There, he said, you have seen what no man now alive has seen, nor will see again. You are right. You should have seen it even better from the smaller tower. I brought you here for another reason. Caspian looked up at him. Pushes him off, sorry. Caspian looked up at him, but the doctor's hood concealed most of his face. The virtue of this tower, said Dr. Cornelius, is that we have 6 empty rooms beneath us and a long stair, and the door at the bottom of the stair is locked. Cannot be overheard. Are you going to tell me what you wouldn't tell me the other day? Said Caspian. Said the doctor, but remember, you and I must never talk about these things except here, on the very top of the great tower. No, that's a promise, said Caspian. But do go on, please. Listen, said the doctor. All you have heard about old Narnia is true. It is not the land of men. It is not the country. It is the country of Aslan. I still can't believe that the old king said there's no such thing as lions. Yeah, go back. I'll go back and read it a little slower. Rather than when the king was losing his crap and yelling at the poor prince. Stop that noise. Never let me catch you talking or thinking. How could there be 2 kings at the same time, and there's no such person as Aslan, and there are no such things as lions?
Yes.
It's like, I mean, for all I know, they made lions extinct, but that's impressive considering they'd have to go all the way down to Kellerman, because we do know there's lions down there.
Well, yeah, they probably did.
But, like, Kellerman's across the desert.
Giant.
Oh. Just to make it so that Aslan is not perceived as being real, they just kill every lion in existence. Man. It's like, can I describe to you what a tyrant is? No, I get it. I just can't get over it. There's no such things as lions. Where am I? There's no such thing as magic, right? The world is flat. Here we go. All you've heard is true. Pardon me. It is the country of Aslan, country of walking trees and visible naiads, of fauns and satyrs, dwarves and giants, of the gods and the centaurs, talking beasts. It was against these that the first Caspian fought. It is you, Telemarines, who silenced the beasts and trees and the fountains, and who killed and drove away the dwarves and fauns, and are now trying to cover up even the memory of them. The king does not allow them to be spoken of. Oh, I do wish he hadn't, said Caspian, and I am glad it was all true, even if it is all over. Many of your race wish that in secret, said Dr. Cornelius. But doctor, said Caspian, why do you say my race? After all, I suppose you're a Telemarine too. Am I? Said the doctor. Dun dun dun! Well, you're a man anyways, said Caspian. Am I? Repeated the doctor in a deeper voice. I can't go lower. Am I? Nope, can't do it. At the same moment, throwing back his... Oh my god. I can't. I'm sorry. It's so silly to me. I was portraying an old man. Am I? Repeated the doctor in a deeper voice, at that same moment, throwing back his hood so that Caspian could see his face clearly in the moonlight. Ta-da! All at once, Caspian realized the truth, and felt he ought to have realized it long before. Dr. Cornelius was so small and so fat, and had such a very long beard. Two thoughts came into his head at the same moment. One was a thought of terror. He's not a real man, not a man at all. He's a dwarf, and he's brought me up here to kill me. The other was sheer delight. There are real dwarves still, and I've seen one at last, and the last thing I'll see will be a dwarf get shoved off. Woohoo! Right? Lions are real! Splat. Let's see. I'm not giving him an accent for this. I've already got his old voice. So you've guessed it in the end, said Dr. Cornelius. Or guessed it nearly right. I'm not a pure dwarf. Haha. I have human blood in me too. Many dwarves escaped in the great battles and lived on, shaving their beards. I'm sorry, shaving their beards. I'm just picturing that they're like, oh, it's a dwarf. Just like cuts it off. Oh, sorry, old fat short man. I was fooled by your long beard. This poor sad beardless dwarves everywhere. How distraught. Shaving their beards and wearing high-heeled shoes and pretending to be men. I can't get past this. Sorry. They have mixed with your telemarines. Can you imagine, like, wedding some lady, but you know, like, in the bedroom, I have a thing to tell you. I have a secret. I actually grow a beard. And these aren't my real shoes. Sorry. I love you anyways. Oh my gosh. I am one of those, only a half-dwarf, and if any of my kindred, the true dwarves, are still alive anywhere in the world, doubtless they would despise me and call me a traitor. But never in all these years have we forgotten our own people and all the other happy creatures of Narnia and the long-lost days of freedom. I'm sorry, Doctor, said the Caspian. It wasn't my fault, you know. I am not saying these things to blame of you, dear prince, answered the doctor. You may well ask why I say them at all, but I have two reasons. Firstly, because my old heart has carried these secret memories so long that it aches with them and would burst if I did not whisper them to you. But secondly, for this, that when you become king, you may help us. For I know that you, also, telemarine though you are, love the old things. I do, said Caspian, but how can I help? You can be kind to the poor remnants of the dwarf people like myself. You can gather learned magicians and try to find a way of awakening the trees once more. You can search through all the nooks and wild places of the land, see if any fauns or talking beasts or dwarves are perhaps still alive and hiding. Do you think there are any? Said Caspian eagerly. I don't know, said the doctor with a deep sigh. Sometimes I am afraid they can't be. I have been looking for traces of them all my life. Sometimes I have thought I heard a dwarf drum in the mountains. Sometimes at night in the woods, I thought I caught a glimpse of fauns and satyrs dancing a long way off. But when I came to the place, there were never anything there. I have often despaired, but something always happens to start me hoping again. I don't know. But at least you can try to be a king like the High King Peter of old, and not like your uncle. Then it is true about the kings and queens too, and about the White Witch, said Caspian. Certainly it is true, said Cornelius. Their reign was the golden age in Narnia, and the land has never forgotten them. Did they live in this castle, Doctor? Nay, my dear, the old man, this castle is a thing of yesterday. Your great-great-grandfather built it. When the 2 sons of Adam and the 2 daughters of Eve were made kings and queens of Narnia by Aslan himself, they lived in the castle of Cair Paravel. No man alive has seen that blessed place, and perhaps even the ruins of it have now vanished. But we believe it was far from here, down at the mouth of the great river, the very shore of the sea. Said Caspian with a shudder. Do you mean in the Black Woods, where all the ghosts live? Your Highness speaks as you have been taught, said the doctor. But it is all lies. There are no ghosts there. That is a story invented by Telemarines. Your kings are in deadly fear of the sea, because they can never quite forget that in all stories, Aslan comes from over the sea. They don't want to go near it. They don't want anyone else to go near it. So they have let great woods grow up to cut their people off from the coast. But because they have quarreled with the trees, they are afraid of the woods. Because they are afraid of the woods, they imagine they are full of ghosts. And the kings and great men, hating both the sea and the woods, partly believe these stories and partly encourage them. They feel safer if no one in Narnia dares to go down to the coast and look out to sea, towards Aslan's land in the morning and the eastern end of the world. There's a deep silence between them for a few minutes. Then Dr. Cornelius said, Come. We must have been here long enough. It is time to go down into bed. Must we? Said Caspian. I'd like to go on talking about these things for hours and hours and hours. Someone might begin looking for us if we did that, said Dr. Cornelius. Drink break. Chapter 5. Caspian's Adventure in the Mountains. After this, Caspian and his tutor had many more secret conversations on the top of the great tower. In each conversation, Caspian learned more about old Narnia, so that thinking and dreaming about the old days and longing that they might come back filled nearly all his spare hours. But of course, he had not many hours to spare, and now his education was beginning in earnest. He learned sword fighting and riding, swimming and diving, swimming and diving, how to shoot with the bow and play on the recorder, and the theorbro, how to hunt a stag and cut him up when he was dead, besides cosmography, rhetoric, heraldry, versification, and of course history, with a little law, physics, alchemy, and astronomy. Of magic he learned only the theory, for Dr. Cornelius said the practical part was not proper study for princes. And I myself, he added, am only a very imperfect magician, can only do the smallest experiments. Of navigation, which is noble and historical art, said the doctor, he was taught nothing because King Miraz disapproved of ships and the sea. He also learned a great deal by using his own eyes and ears. As a little boy, he had often wondered why he disliked his aunt, Queen Pruna Prismina. He now said that it was because she disliked him. He also began to see that Narnia was an unhappy country. The taxes were high, and the laws were stern, and Miraz was a cruel man. After some years, there came a time when the queen seemed to be ill, and there was a great deal of bustle and pother about her in the castle, and doctors came, and the courtiers whispered. This was in early summertime, and one night, while all the fuss was going on, Caspian was unexpectedly wakened by Dr. Cornelius after he had been only a few hours in bed. Are we going to do a little astronomy, Doctor? Said Caspian. Hush, said the doctor. Trust me. Do exactly as I tell you. Put on all your clothes. You have a long journey before you. Caspian was very surprised, but he learned to have confidence in his tutor, and he began doing what he was told at once. When he was dressed, the doctor said, I have a wallet for you. You must go into the next room and fill it with victuals from your Highness's supper table. My gentlemen-in-waiting will be there, said Caspian. They are fast asleep and will not wake, said the doctor. I am a very minor magician, but I can at least contrive a charmed sleep. They went into the antechamber, and there, sure enough, the 2 gentlemen-in-waiting were sprawled out on chairs and snoring hard. Dr. Cornelius quickly cut up the remnants of a cold chicken and some slices of venison and put them, with bread and an apple or so and a little flask of good wine, into the wallet which he then gave to Caspian. It fitted on by a strap over Caspian's shoulder, like a satchel you would use for taking books to school. "Have you your sword?" asked the doctor. "Yes," said Caspian. "Then put this mantle over all to hide the sword in the wall." "That's right. And now we must go to the great tower and talk." When they reached the top of the tower, it was cloudy night, not at all like the night when they had seen the conjunction of Tarva and Alambil. Dr. Cornelius said, "Dear Prince, you must leave this castle at once and go to seek your fortune in the wide world. Your life is in danger here." "Why?" asked Caspian. "Because you are the true king of Narnia, Caspian the 10th, the true son and heir of Caspian the 9th. Long live to your majesty." And suddenly, to Caspian's great surprise, the little man dropped down on his knee and kissed his hand. "What does it all mean? I don't understand," said Caspian. "I wonder you have never asked me before," said the doctor, "why, being the son of King Caspian, you are not King Caspian yourself. Everyone except your majesty knows that Miraz is a usurper. When he first began to rule, he did not even pretend to be the king. He called himself Lord Protector. Then your royal mother died, the good queen, and the only Telemarine who was ever kind to me. And then, one by one, all the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. Not by accident either. Miraz weeded them out. Elazar and Uvalas were shot with arrows on a hunting party by chance. It was pretended. All the great house of Passerids he sent to fight giants on the northern frontier, till one by one they fell. Erlain and Ermon, and a dozen more he executed for treasons on a false charge. The 2 brothers of Beaver's Dam he shut up as madmen. And finally he persuaded the 7 noble lords, who alone among all the Telemarines did not fear the sea, to sail away and look for new lands. Oh, 7 noble lords who alone among all the Telemarines did not fear the sea, to sail away and look for new lands beyond the Eastern Ocean. That shows up in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So they were on Prince Caspian's side, or at least his dad's side. They were quote-unquote noble lords, okay? As he intended, they never came back. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he instructed them, begged him to become king. And of course he did. "Do you mean now he wants to kill me too?" "That is almost certain," said Dr. Cornelius. "Why?" said Caspian. "I mean, why didn't he do it long ago if he wanted to? And what harm have I done him?" "He has changed his mind about you because of something that happened only 2 hours ago. Queen has had a son." "I don't see what's that got to do with it," said Caspian. "Don't see!" exclaimed the doctor. "Have all my lessons in history and politics taught you no more than that? Listen, as long as he has no children of his own, he was willing enough that you should be king after he died. He may not have cared much about you, but he would rather you should have the throne than a stranger. Now that he has a son of his own, he will want his own son to be the next king. You are in the way. He'll clear you out of the way." "Is he really as bad as that?" said Caspian. "Would he really murder me?" "He murdered your father," said Dr. Cornelius. Caspian felt very strange and said nothing. "I can tell you the whole story," said the doctor, "but not now. There is no time. You must fly at once." "You'll come with me?" said Caspian. "I dare not," said the doctor. "It would make your danger greater. 2 are more easily tracked than 1. Dear Prince, dear King Caspian, you must be very brave. You must go alone and at once. Try to get across the southern border to the court of King Nine in Archenland. He will be good to you." "Shall I never see you again?" said Caspian in a quavering voice. "I hope so, dear king," said the doctor. "What friend have I in the wide world except your majesty? I have a little magic, but in the meantime, Speed is everything. Here are 2 gifts before you. This is a little purse of gold. Alas, all the treasures in the castle should be yours, owned by right. And here is something far better. He put in Caspian's hands something which he could hardly see, which he knew by the feel to be a horn. That, said Dr. Cornelius, is the greatest and most sacred treasure of Narnia. Many terrors I endured, many spells did I utter to find it when I was still young. It is the magic horn of Queen Susan herself. Which she left behind her when she vanished from Narnia at the end of the Golden Age. Oh, that's sad. So the moment the group disappeared, that was the end of the Golden Age. That is true, I guess. It is said that whoever blows it shall have strange help. No one can say how strange. It may have the power to call Queen Lucy and King Edmund and Queen Susan and High King Peter back from the past. They will set all to rights. Maybe that it will call up Aslan himself. Take it, King Caspian, but do not use it except at your greatest need. And now, haste, haste, haste. The little door at the very bottom of the tower, the door into the garden, is unlocked. There we must part. Can't I get my horse, Destrider? Wait, Destrider? Weird. He is already saddled and waiting for you, just at the corner of the orchard. During the long climb down the winding staircase, Cornelius whispered many more words of direction and advice. Caspian's heart was sinking, but he tried to take it all in. Then came the fresh air in the garden, a fervent hand-clasp with the doctor, a run across the lawn, a welcoming whinny from Destrier, and so King Caspian X left the castle of his fathers. Excuse me. And so King Caspian X left the castle of his fathers. Looking back, he saw fireworks going up to celebrate the birth of the new prince. At night, he rode southward, choosing byways and bridle paths through woods as long as he was in... choosing byways and bridle paths through woods as long as he was in country he knew. But afterwards, he kept to the high road. Destrier was as excited as his master at this unusual journey, and Caspian, through tears had come into his eyes and saying goodbye to Dr. Cornelius, felt brave and in a way happy to think that he was King Caspian riding to seek adventures, with a sword on his left hip and Queen Susan's magic horn in his right. But when day came, with a sprinkle of rain, and he looked about him and saw on every side unknown woods, wild heaths, and blue mountains, he thought how large and strange the world was, felt frightened and small. As soon as it was full daylight, he left the road and found an open grassy place amid a wood where he could rest. He took off Destrier's bridle and let him graze, ate some cold chicken and drank a little wine, and presently fell asleep. It was late afternoon when he woke. He ate a morsel and continued his journey, still southward, by many unfrequented lands. He was now on a land of hills, going up and down, but always more up than down. From every ridge he could see the mountains growing bigger and blacker ahead. As the evening closed in, he was riding their lower slopes. The wind rose. Soon rain fell in torrents. The stride became easy. There was thunder in the air. And now they entered a dark, seemingly endless pine forest, and all the stories Caspian had ever heard of trees being unfriendly to man crowded into his mind. He remembered that he was, after all, a Telemarin, who, of the race who had cut down trees wherever they could, and were at war with all the wild things, and thought he himself might be unlike other Telemarines. And though he himself might be unlike other Telemarines, the trees could not be expected to know this. Nor did they. The wind became a tempest. The woods roared and creaked all around them. There came a crash. A tree fell right across the road just behind him. "Quiet, Destrider, quiet," said Caspian, patting his horse's neck. But he was trembling himself, and knew that he had escaped death by an inch. Lightning flashed, and a great crack of thunder seemed to break the sky in two just overhead. The strider bolted in good earnest. Caspian was a good rider, but he had not the strength to hold him back. He kept his seat, but he knew that his life hung by a thread during the wild career that followed. Tree after tree rose up before them in the dusk, and was only just avoided. Then, almost too suddenly to hurt, and yet it was hurt. Yet it did hurt him too. Something struck Caspian on the forehead, and he knew no more. When he came to himself, he was lying in a firelit place with bruised limbs and a bad headache. Low voices were speaking close at hand. I don't know what to call these. The animal voices or horses? Or dwarves. Scanning ahead. Okay, dwarves. There's a lot of dwarves. Okay. And now, said one, before it wakes up, we must decide what to do with it. Kill it, said another. Can't let it live, it would betray us. We ought to have killed it at once, or else let it alone, said the third voice. Can't kill it now. Not after we've taken it in and bandaged its head and all. It would be a murdering a guest. Gentlemen, said Caspian in a feeble voice, whatever you do to me, I hope you'll be kind to my poor horse. Your horse has taken flight long before we found you, said the first voice, a curiously husky, earthly voice as Caspian now noticed. Now don't let it talk you around with its pretty words, said the second voice. I still see. Horns and halibuts, exclaimed the third voice. Of course we're not going to murder it. For shame, Nickabrick. What do you say, Truffle Hunter? What shall we do with it? I shall give it a drink, said the first voice, presumably Truffle Hunter's. A dark shape approached the bed. Caspian felt an arm slip gently under his shoulders, if it was exactly an arm. The shape somehow seemed wrong. Oh, it's probably not. Whatever. The face was bent forward towards him and seemed wrong too. He got the impression that it was very hairy and very long-nosed, and there were odd white patches on each side of it. It's a mask of some sort, he thought, Caspian. Or perhaps I'm in a fever in imagining it. A cupful of something sweet and hot was set to his lips. He drank. At that moment, one of the others poked the fire. A blaze sprang up, and Caspian almost screamed with the shock of the sudden light revealed the face that was looking into his own. It was not a man's face, but a badger's, though larger and friendlier and more intelligent than the face of any badger he'd seen before. And it had certainly been talking. He saw, too, that he was on a bed of heather in a cave. By the fire sat two little bearded men, so much wilder and shorter and hairier and thicker than Dr. Cornelius that he knew them at once for real dwarves, ancient dwarves, with not a drop of human blood in their veins. And Caspian knew that he might have found the old Narnians at last. Then his head began to swim again. In the next few days he learned to know them by names. The badger was called Truffle Hunter. He was the oldest and kindest of the three. The dwarf who had wanted to kill Caspian was a sour black dwarf. That is, his hair and beard were black, and as thick and hard as horsehair. His name was Nickabrick. The other dwarf was a red dwarf, with hair rather like a fox's, and he was called Ceequin. And now, said Nickabrick, on the first evening when Caspian was well enough to sit up and talk, we still got to decide what to do with this human. You two think you've done it a kindness by not letting me kill it, but I suppose the upshot is that we have to keep a prisoner for life. I'm certainly not going to let it go alive, to go back to its own kind and betray us all. Bulbs and bolsters, Nickabrick, said Trumpkin. Why need you talk so unhandsomely? It isn't the creature's fault that it bashed its head against a tree outside our hole, and I don't think it looks like a traitor. I say, said Caspian, you haven't yet found out whether I want to go back. I don't. I want to stay with you, if you'll let me. I've been looking for people like you all my life. That's a likely story, growled Nickabrick. You're a Telemarin and a human, aren't you? Of course you'll want to go back to your own kind. Well, even if I did, I couldn't, said Caspian. I was flying for my life when I had my accident. The king wants to kill me. If you'd killed me, you'd have done him the very thing that pleased him. I don't know what the voice to give a badger. What? Honey badger don't give a flip. Second. God, I don't know. Well now, said Truffle Hunter, you don't say so. Eh, said Trumpkin. What's this? What have you been doing, human? To fall foul of mirrors at your age? He's my uncle, began Caspian, when Knickerbock jumped up with his hand on his dagger. There you are, he cried, not only a tellerman, but close kin to our greatest enemy. An heir to our greatest enemy, and you're still mad enough to let this creature live? He would have stabbed Caspian then and there if the Badger and Trumpkin had not got in the way and forced him back to his seat and held him down. Now, once and for all, Nickelbrick, said Trumpkin, will you contain yourself, or must Truffle Hunter and I sit on your head? Nickelbrick sulkily promised to behave, and the other two asked Caspian to tell his whole story. When he had done so, there was a moment's silence. This is the queerest thing I've ever heard, said Trumpkin. I don't like it, said Nickelbrick. I don't know there were stories about us still told among the humans. The less they know about us, the better. That old nurse now, she'd better have held her tongue. And it's all mixed up with the tutor, a renegade dwarf. I hate him. I hate him worse than the humans. You mark my words, no good will come of it. Don't you go talking about things you don't understand, Knickerbrick, said Truffle Hunter. You dwarves are as forgetful and changeable as the humans themselves. I'm a beast, I am, and a badger, what's more. We don't change. I'm sorry. I don't know, it's silly to me, Badger being like, unlike you, we don't change. You should know because I'm a badger. It just seems silly to me. We hold on. I say great good will come of it. This is the true king of Narnia, and we beasts remember, even if dwarfs forget, that Narnia was never right except when a son of Adam was king. Whistles and whirligigs, Truffle Hunter, said Trumpkin. You don't mean you want to give the country to the humans? I said nothing about that, answered the Badger. It's not man's country. Who should know that better than me? But it's a country for a man to be king of. We Badgers have long enough memories to know that. Why, bless us all, wasn't High King Peter a man? Do you still believe all those old stories? asked Trumpkin. I tell you, we don't change, we beasts, said Truffle Hunter. We don't forget. I believe in High King Peter and the rest that reigned at Cair Paravel as firmly as I believed in Aslan himself. As firmly as that, I dare say, said Trumpkin. But who believes in Aslan nowadays? I do, said Caspian. And if I hadn't believed in him before, I would now. Back there among humans, the people who laughed at Aslan would have laughed at stories about talking beasts and dwarves. Sometimes I did wonder if there really was such a person as Aslan, but then sometimes I wondered if there were really people like you. Yet there you are. That's right, said Truffle Hunter. You're right, King Caspian, and as long as you will be true to old Narnia, you shall be my king, whatever they say. Long life to your majesty. You make me sick, Badger, growled Nickelbrick. The High King Peter and the rest may have been men, but they were a different sort of men. This is one of the cursed Tellermans. He has haunted beasts for sport. Haven't you now? He asked, rounding suddenly on Caspian. Well, to tell you the truth, I have, said Caspian, but they weren't talking beasts. It's all the same thing, said Nickelbrick. No, said Truffle Hunter. You know it isn't. You know very well that the beasts in Narnia nowadays are different, and they are no more than poor dumb, witless creatures you find in Calormen or Talmar. They're smaller, too. They're far more different from us than the half-dwarves are from you. There was a great deal more talk, but it all ended with the agreement that Caspian should stay, and even the promise that as soon as he was able to go out, he should be taken to see what Trumpkin called the others. For apparently in these wild parts, all sorts of creatures from the old days of Narnia still lived on in hiding. I mean, it makes, it's the end of that chapter, it kind of makes sense that out in the woods and out and about there are just the animals and dwarves and spirits and stuff, because, like, the king is put, like, they let trees grow and pretended the coastline doesn't exist. I feel like just ignoring the problem is kind of their go-to. The witch at least was active. She went out and hunted people. Oh, is that a large poke? Continuing. Chapter 6. The People That Lived in Hiding. Now began the happiest times that Caspian had ever known. On a fine summer morning, when the dew lay on the grass, he set off with the badger and the two dwarves up through the forest to a high saddle in the mountains, and down on their sunny southern slopes, where one looked across the green world of Archenland. We will first go... Sorry, wrong name. We will first go to the three bulgy bears, said Trumpkin. He came in a glade to an old hollow oak tree covered with moss, and Truffle Hunter tapped with his paw 3 times on the trunk, and there was no answer. When he tapped again, and a woolly sort of voice came from inside, "Goy, it's no time to get up yet." But when he tapped the 3rd time, there was a noise like a small earthquake from inside, and a sort of door opened, and out came 3 brown bears, very bulgy indeed, and blinking their little eyes. When everything had been explained to them, which took a long time because they were so sleepy, they said, just as Truffle Hunter had said, that a son of Adam ought to be king of Narnia, and all kissed Caspian, very wet, snuffly kisses they were, and offered him some honey. Caspian did not really want honey without bread at that time in the morning, but he thought it polite to accept. It took him a long time afterwards to get unsticky. After that, they went on till they came among tall beech trees, and Truffle Hunter called out, "Patterwig, Patterwig, Patterwig," and almost at once, bounding down from branch to branch till he was just above their heads, came the most magnificent red squirrel that Caspian had ever seen. He was far bigger than the ordinary dumb squirrels which he had sometimes seen in the castle gardens. Indeed, he was nearly the size of a terrier, and the moment you looked into his face, you saw that he could talk. Indeed, the difficulty was to get him to stop talking, for, like all squirrels, he was a chatterer. He welcomed Caspian at once, and asked if he would like a nut, and Caspian said thanks, he would, but as Patterwig went bounding away to fetch it, Truffle Hunter whispered in Caspian's ear, "Don't look the other way. It is very bad manners among squirrels to watch anyone get to his store, or to look as if you wanted to know where it was." And Patterwig came back with a nut, and Caspian ate it, and after that Patterwig said that he could take any messages to other friends. "For I can go nearly everywhere without setting foot to the ground," he said. Truffle Hunter and the dwarves thought this a very good idea, and gave Pattertwig messages to all sorts of people with queer names, telling them all to come to a feast and a council on Dancing Lawn at midnight, 3 nights ahead. "And you'd better tell your 3 bulgies too," added Trumpkin. "We forgot to mention it to them." The next visit was to the 7 brothers of Shuddering Wood. Trumpkin led the way back to the saddle, and then down eastward on the northern slope of the mountains, till they came to a very solemn place among rocks and fir trees. They went very quietly, and presently Caspian could feel the ground shake under his feet, as if someone were hammering down below. Trumpkin went to a flat stone about the size of the top of a water butt. What the hell is a water butt? Hi, Carrie. Welcome. So is it like just a wooden round lid? Cool. No idea how big that is. Maybe the size of a tire? That's a lot of water. I'm gonna go back to reading because I have no idea how big that is. About the size of the top of a water butt, and stamped on it with his foot. After a long pause, it was moved away by someone or something underneath, and there was a dark, round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it. And in the middle of the hole, the head of a dwarf, very like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been. But in the end, the whole party was invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending a dark stairway into the earth, but when he came to the bottom, he saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. the whole place with a smithy. A subterranean stream ran past one side of it. Sorry. Fidgeting. A subterranean stream ran past one side of it. Two dwarves were at the bellows. Another was holding a piece of red-hot metal on the anvil with a pair of tongs. A fourth was hammering it, and two wiping their horny little hands on a greasy cloth. What the hell? I'm assuming calloused? On a greasy cloth were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, but when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king!" And the gifts were noble. Mail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian, and Trumpkin and Knickerbrick. The badger could have had the same if he'd liked, but he said he was a beast. He was, and if his claws and teeth could not keep his skin whole, it wasn't worth keeping. The workmanship of the arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked, in comparison, as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarves, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. A little farther on, in a dry, rocky ravine, they reached the cave of 5 black dwarfs. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end, the eldest of them said, "If he is against Mires, we'll have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go farther up for you, up to the crags? There's an ogre or two, and a hag we could introduce you to up there." "Certainly not," said Caspian. "I should think not indeed," said Trufflehunter. "We want none of that soot on our side." Knickerbrick disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the horrible creatures out of the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants in Narnia still. "We should not have Aslan for a friend if we brought in that rabble," said Trufflehunter, and they came away from the cave of the black dwarves. "Oh, Aslan," said Trumpkin, cheerily but contemptuously, "what matters more is that you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Knickerbrick. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Knickerbrick, that'll better these cursed Telemarin barbarians to pieces or drive them out of Narnia. Anyone or anything. Aslan or the White Witch. Do you understand?" Oh, that's kind of dark. So these are creatures that would fight each other in normal circumstances. But because they are all, simultaneously being eliminated by Mires and the Talamarins in charge, they are working together and willing to, put aside their personal differences because they're all kind of mythical creatures being hunted. Makes sense. Didn't pick up on that before. It's interesting to think that what happens when the kings return back to power. Like, what about the hags and stuff that were willing to help? Are they still going to be hunted, or are they just going to be kind of ignored for a couple generations? A mutual agreement to leave you alone for several generations. But if you do bad stuff, oh... Actually, that's not a bad thing. If as long as you don't do evil to people, we'll let them be. Oh. And by people, I also mean talking animals and dwarves. Silence, said Trufflehunter. You do know that you are you do not know what you are saying. She was a worse enemy than Mires and all his race. Not the dwarves, she wasn't, said Knickerbrick. Their next visit was a pleasanter one. As they came lower down, the mountains opened out into a great glen or wooded forge with a swift river running at the bottom. The open places near the river's edge were a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. Here Trufflehunter called again, "Glenstorm! Glenstorm!" And after a pause, Caspian heard the sound of hooves. It grew louder, till the valley trembled, and at last, breaking and trampling the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creature that Caspian had yet seen, the great centaur Glenstorm, and his 3 sons. His flanks were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and knew that they had come, and he knew what they had come about. "Long live the king," he cried. "I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined?" Up till now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking of a war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or of attacking a party of hunters, if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But in the main, they had thought only age of living to themselves in woods and caves and building up an attempt at old Narnia in hiding. As soon as Glenstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. "Do you mean a real war to drive Miraz out of Narnia?" asked Caspian. "What else?" said the centaur. "Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and grit with sword?" "Is it possible, Glenstorm?" said the badger. "The time is ripe," said Glenstorm. "I watch the skies, badger, for it is mine to watch, and it is yours to remember. Tarva and Alambil have met in the halls of high heaven, and on earth a son of Adam has once more arisen to rule and name the creatures. The hour has struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war." He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war against, and quite certain that they must wage war. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided, cakes of oaten meal, and apples and herbs, and wine and cheese. The next place they were to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way round in order to avoid a region in which men lived. It was well on to the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields, warm between the hedgerows, where Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in the green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected: a talking mouse. He was, of course, bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high. Oh, I got excited. I realized who this is. Well over a foot high, where he stood on his hind legs, and with ears nearly as long as, though broader than, a rabbit's. His name was Reepicheep, and he was a gay and martial mouse. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard and successfully not to laugh, but he couldn't help thinking of Reepicheep, and all his people could very easily be put in a washing basket and carried home on one's back. It would take too long to mention all the creatures whom Caspian met that day: Clodsley, Shovel the Mole, the 3 hard-biters, who were badgers like Truffle Hunter, Camilla the Hare, Hogglestalk, and the Hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of a wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms, which now threw long shadows across it. For the sun was setting, the daisies closing, and the rooks flying home to bed. Here they supped on food they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Knickerbrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the badger, "if only we could wake the spirits of these trees and this well, we should have done a good day's work." "Can't we?" asked Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no power over them. Since the humans came into the land, felling forests and defiling streams, the dryads and naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if ever they will stir again? And that is a great loss to our side. The Tellarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go mad with fright and be chased out of Narnia as quick as their legs could carry them." "What imaginations you animals have," said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. "But why stop at trees and waters? Wouldn't it be even nicer if the stones started throwing themselves at old Miraz?" The badger only grunted at this, and after that there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep when he thought he heard faint musical sound from the depths of the woods at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream, and turned over again, but as soon as his ear touched the ground, he felt, or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned, clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up staring into the wood. The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and yet dreamy, and the noise of many light feet, till at last, out from the woods into the moonlight, came dancing shapes such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarves, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns. The upper parts of their bodies gleamed naked in the pale light, but their legs and feet were those of goats. I think we're gonna pause here because I think you said the ads soon. Oh, drink. Am I raspy? I'm out of liquid. Maybe that's for you to hydrate yourself.
No, say hello.
Hello, Ronnie. I'm all out. I'm out of liquid.
Hot chocolate.
Yes. Please, thank you. That is true. Especially some of the lower voices. They are already raspy. So ads starting, so we're taking a pause while it finishes. I think we are about a third of the way through this book already. Darn. And then after this one comes The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Hope everyone's having a good. It's chilly up here, but it's supposed to warm up in the next couple days. Almost made our way through all of the books, halfway. Let's see, we'd be finishing the Prince Caspian, then the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and the Silver Chair. I believe the Silver Chair also has Caspian. I can't remember. Oh, wait. Yeah, the Silver Chair starts with Caspian as an older gentleman, but it's the story about... what's his name? It starts with an R. And then after the Silver Chair, the last battle. Then they'd be done. And if anyone's missed any of the, or they want to listen to the beginning of these books, Kath has, or Hero has uploaded them to his YouTube. What's that for? Okay. Maybe too.
Just waiting for water.
Do you know what about the ads? Yeah, I'm like awkwardly trying to shoot the breeze with nobody.
Oh, you have to wait till the ads are over.
I'm gonna set a timer for 2 minutes. I have to entertain myself, but I'm the worst company. 2 minutes. Timer. 2 minutes. A minute. Ni. And I don't remember what minutes are. There we go. Oh. Everybody's sleeping. The best kind of lurking. As long as everyone gets a good night's sleep. It's story time, the best time to go for a nap. Every now and then we sometimes would do little intermission fairy tales, but I found that that reading and going for 9 to 12, it was a little too hard. So like more shoot the breeze between ads. Unless we get people who are I guess they're subscribers. we get enough of those people who generally want little intermission stuff, we'll do that, but yeah. Plus. Kind of nice that they have this map of Narnia. I wish I could. Oh wait, I can take a photo of it and then Kathis can share it. That's what we can do.
Chocolate with whipped cream.
It's nice and warm and my fingers are cold. I struggle with whipped cream with the lids because it just blocks it until it comes. Oh, okay, so it's not just like a layer on top. I appreciate it. I am going to take a photo. I'm going to take a photo of this. Exactly. Because we actually get a nice picture, at least of this era, of Narnia. And we can see Care Paravel and all that stuff. Yeah, best time for naps. Of course, I take a photo and now it's making the loud noise. No, that might wake people up. Oh my gosh. I just wish it wasn't squished between 2 pages. Come on. Okay. Oh, I didn't put it. My phone got rid of the... There we go, that should do it. I needed a flash. Illuminator. There we go. And I send this to Hero. I can remember how to get to Discord on my phone. Close everything, that's the answer. There we go. Hero. Here. Add photo. There, now you can add a picture. They can see a map. No, that's fair. So those are the forests. Care Paravel. The dancing lawns over there. Those, wow, they traveled really far. Truffle hunters. Actually makes sense because they were discussing how they got from Beaver's Dam pretty much all the way down to Care Paravel with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe within like a day or two. So that makes sense. It doesn't take that long. I like how there's like a dragon in the Wildlands. The Lantern's Waste has to be where like the lantern is. Map of Narnia and adjoining lands. I know it is. It's a big picture. Miraz is his castle. Okay, so that Miraz lives up there. He traveled all the way through. They go all the way to Truffle Hunter's Cave? Where's Truffle Hunter not living there? Oh well. Back to story. Look at all those maps. Ba-ba-ba. They ate with the centaurs. The talking mouse. Reap cheap. Cheap. Making the trees. The sound of music. Feet of goats. Fawns! Cried Caspian, jumping up, and in a moment they were all round him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining in the dance. Trumpkin, with heavier and jerkier movements, did likewise, and even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumbered about as best he could. Only Knickerbrick stayed where he was, looking on in silence. The fawns footed all round Caspian to their reedy pipes. Their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked into his. Dozens of fawns, Minitus, Anobentius, Drumnus, Volinus, Voltinus, Gerbius, oh my gosh, Niminus, Narcissus, and Orskans. Pater Twig had sent them all. When Caspian awoke next morning, he could hardly believe that it had not all been a dream. The grass was covered with little cloven hoof marks. Chapter 7: Old Narnia in Danger. The place where they had met the fauns was, of course, Dancing Lawn itself, and here Caspian and his friends remained till the night of the Great Council, to sleep under the stars, to drink nothing but well water, and to live chiefly on nuts and wild fruit was a strange experience for Caspian, after his bed with silken sheets in a tapestried chamber at the castle, with meals laid out on gold and silver dishes in the anteroom, and attendants ready at his call. But he had never enjoyed himself more. Never had sleep been more refreshing, nor food tasted more savory, and he began already to harden, and his face wore a kinglier look. When the great night came, and his various strange subjects came stealing into the lawn by ones and twos and threes, or by sixes and sevens, the moon then shining almost at her full, his heart swelled as he saw their numbers and heard their greetings. All whom he had met were there: bulgy bears and the red dwarfs and the black dwarfs, moles and badgers, hares and hedgehogs, and others whom he had not yet seen, 5 satyrs as red as foxes, the whole contingent of talking mice, armed to the teeth, and following a shrill trumpet, some owls, the old raven at Ravenscar. Last of all, and this took Caspian's breath away, with the centaurs came a small but genuine giant, Wimbleweather of Dead Men's Hill, carrying on his back a basket full of rather seasick dwarves who had accepted his offer to lift, and were now wishing they had walked instead. The bulgy bears were very anxious to have the feast first, and leave the council till afterwards, perhaps till tomorrow. Reepicheep and his mice said that the councils and feasts could both wait, and proposed storming Mirez in his own castle that very night. Pater Twig and the other squirrels said that they could talk and eat at the same time, so why not have the council and feast all at once? The moles proposed throwing up enchantments round the lawn before they did anything else. The fauns thought it would be better to begin with a solemn dance. The old raven, while agreeing with the bears that it would take too long to have a full council before supper, begged to be allowed to give a brief address to the whole company. But Caspian and the centaurs and the dwarves overruled all of these suggestions, and instead insisted on holding a real council of war at once. When all the other creatures had been persuaded to sit down quietly in a great circle, and when, with more difficulty, they had got Pater Twig to stop running to and fro and saying, "Silence, silence, everyone, for the king's speech," Caspian, feeling a little nervous, got up. "Narnians," he began. Never got further, for at that very moment Camillo the hare said, "Hush, there's a man somewhere near." They were all creatures of the wild, accustomed to being hunted, and they all became still as statues. The beasts all turned their noses in the direction which Camillo had indicated. "Smells like man, yet not quite like man," whispered Truffle Hunter. "It's getting steadily nearer," said Camillo. "2 badgers and 3 dwarves, with your bows at the ready. Go softly off to meet it," said Caspian. "We'll settle 'em," said a black dwarf grimly, fitting a shaft to his bowstring. "Don't shoot it if it's alone," said Caspian. "Catch it." "Why?" said the dwarf. Do as you're told," said Glenstorm the centaur. Everyone waited in silence while the 3 dwarves and 2 badgers trotted stealthily across to the trees on the northwest side of the lawn. Then came a sharp dwarfish cry. "Stop! Who goes there?" and a sudden spring. A moment later, a voice, which Caspian knew well, could be heard saying, all right, I'm unarmed. Take my risks if you like, worthy badgers, but don't bite right through them. I want to speak to the king." "Dr. Cornelius!" cried Caspian with joy, and rushed forwards to greet his old tutor. Everyone else crowded round. "Ha!" said Knickerbrick. "A renegade dwarf and half a heifer. Shall I pass my sword through its throat?" "Be quiet, Knickerbrick," said Trumpkin. "The creature can't help its ancestry." "This is my greatest friend, and the savior of my life," said Caspian, and anyone who doesn't like his company may leave my army at once. Dearest Doctor, I am glad to see you again. However did you find us out? By a little use of simple magic, Your Majesty, said the Doctor, who was still puffing and blowing from having walked so fast. But there's no time to go into that now. We must all fly from this place at once. You're already betrayed, and Miraz is on the move. Before midday tomorrow, you will be surrounded. Betrayed? Said Caspian. By whom? Another renegade dwarf, no doubt, said Knickerbrick. By your horse, Destrider, said Dr. Cornelius. The poor brute knew no better. When you were knocked off, of course, he went dawdling back to his stable in the castle. Then the secret of your flight was known. I made myself scarce, having no wish to be questioned about it, in Miraz's torture chamber. I had a pretty good guess from my crystal as to where I should find you. But all day, that was the day before yesterday, I saw Miraz tracking parties out in the woods. Yesterday, I learned that his army is out. I don't think some of your, pure-blooded dwarves have as much woodcraft as might be expected. You've left tracks all over the place. Great carelessness. At any rate, something has warned Miraz that old Narnia is also dead, as he had hoped. He is on the move. Hooray! Said a very shrill and small voice from somewhere at the Doctor's feet. Let them come, and I ask that the King will put me and my people to the front. What on earth? Said Dr. Cornelius. Has your Majesty got grasshoppers or mosquitoes in your army? Then after stooping down and peering carefully through his spectacles, he broke into a laugh. By the lion, he swore, it's a mouse. Signor Mouse, I desire your better acquaintance. I am honored by meeting so valiant a beast. My friendship you shall have, learned man, piped Reepicheep, and any dwarf or giant in the army who does not give you a good laugh shall have my sword to reckon with. Give you good language. Is there time for this foolery? Said Knickerbrick. What of our plans? Battle or flight? Battle if need be, said Trumpkin. We're hardly ready for it yet, and this is no very defensible place. I like the idea of running away, said Caspian. Hear him, said the bulgy bears. Whatever we do, don't let's have any running, especially not before supper, and not too soon after, if neither. Those who can run first do not always run last, said the centaur. And why should we let enemy choose our position instead of choosing it ourselves? Let us find a strong place. That's wise, Your Majesty, that's wise, said Truffle Hunter. But where are we to go? Said several voices. Your Majesty, said Dr. Cornelius, and all you variety of creatures, I think we must fly east and down the river to the great woods. The Telmarines hate that region. They have always been afraid of the sea and of something that may come over the sea. That is why they had let the great woods grow up. If traditions speak true, the ancient Carabaravel was at the river mouth. All that place is friendly to us and hateful to our enemies. We must go to Aslan's How. Aslan's How? Said several voices. We do not know what it is. It lies within the skirts of the great wood, and is a huge mound which Narnians raised in very ancient times over a very magical place, where there stood, and partly still stands, a very magical stone. The mound is all hollowed out within into galleries and caves, and the stone is in the central cave of it all. There is room in the mound for all of our stores, and those of us who have most need of cover and are most accustomed to underground life can be lodged in the caves. The rest of us can live in the wood. At a pinch, all of us, except the worthy giant, could retreat into the mound itself, and there we should be beyond the reach of every danger except famine. It is a good thing we have a learned man among us, said Truffle Hunter, but Trumpkin muttered under his breath, Soup and celery, I wish our leaders would think less about these old wives' tales and more about victuals and arms. But approval of Cornelius's proposal, and that very night, but all approved of Cornelius's but all approved of Cornelius's proposal, and that very night, half an hour later, they were on the march. Before sunrise, they arrived at Aslan's How. It was certainly an awesome place, a round green hill on top of another hill, long since grown over with trees, and one little low doorway leading into it. The tunnels inside were a perfect maze till you got to know them, and they were lined with and roofed with small stones. And on the stones, peering into the twilight, Caspian saw strange characters and snaky patterns in pictures in which the form of a lion was repeated again and again. It all seemed to be an even older Narnia than the Narnia of which his nurse had told him. It was after they had taken up their quarters in and around the How that fortune began to turn against them. King Mirror's scouts soon found their new lair, and he and his army arrived on the edge of the woods. And as so often happens, the enemy turned out stronger than they had reckoned. Caspian's heart sank as he saw company after company arriving, and though Mirza's men may have been afraid of going into the wood, they were even more afraid of Miraz. With him in command, they carried battle deeply. With him in command, they carried battle deeply into it, and sometimes almost to the How itself. Sorry, it's weird phrasing. Caspian and other captains, of course, made many sorties out into the open country. Thus there was fighting on most days, and sometimes by night as well. But Caspian's party had the whole of the worst of it. At last, there came a night when everything had gone as badly as possible, and the rain, which had been falling heavily all day, had ceased. It ceased at nightfall, only to give place to raw cold. That morning, Caspian had arranged what his biggest... Give me a moment. I'm struggling. Okay. Or what? Are you hearing a ticky-tacks? No, I'm just starting to stumble over my own words and lips. I'm having a hard time enunciating and articulating clearly. I just want to get, at the very least, to the end of this chapter, and then it'll be pretty much 12. That morning, Caspian had arranged what was his biggest battle yet, and all had hung their hopes on it. He, with most of the dwarves, was to have fallen on the king's right wing at daybreak, and then, when they were heavily engaged, giant Wimbleweather, with the centaurs, and some of the fiercest beasts, was to have broken out from another place and endeavored to cut the king's right off from the rest of the army. But it had failed. Not one had warned Caspian, because no one was in these days of Narnia remembered, that giants are not at all clever. Poor Wimbleweather, though as brave as a lion, was a true giant in that respect. He had broken out at the wrong time and from the wrong place, and both his party and Caspian's had suffered badly and done the enemy little harm. Best of the bears had been hurt, a centaur terribly wounded, and there were a few in Caspian's party who had not lost blood. It was a gloomy company that huddled under dripping trees to eat their scanty supper. The gloomiest of all was giant Wimbleweather. He knew it was all his fault. He sat in silence, shedding big tears which collected at the end of his nose, and then fell off with a huge splash on the whole bivouac of the mice, who had just been beginning to get warm and drowsy. They all jumped up, shaking the water out of their ears and wringing off their little blankets, and asked the giant in shrill but forcible voices whether he thought they weren't wet enough without that sort of thing. And then other people woke up and told the mice that they had been enrolled as scouts and not as a concert party, and asked why they couldn't keep quiet. And Wimbleweather tiptoed away to find some place where he could be miserable in peace, and stepped on somebody's tail, and somebody, they said afterwards it was a fox, bit him, and so everyone was out of temper. But in the secret and magical chamber at the heart of How, King Caspian, with Cornelius and the Badger, and Nickelbrick and Trumpkin, were at council. Thick pillars of ancient workmanship supported the roof. In the center was the stone itself, a stone table split right down the center, and covered with what was once writing of some kind. but ages of wind and rain and snow had almost worn it away. In old times, when the stone table had stood on the hilltop, and the mountain had not yet been built above it. They were not using the table nor sitting round it. It was too magic a thing for any common use. They sat on logs a little way from it. Between them was a rough wood table, on which stood a rude clay lamp, lighting up their pale faces and throwing big shadows on the walls. "If your majesty is ever to use the horn," said Truffle Hunter, "I think the time is now come." Caspian had of course told them of his treasure several days ago. "We are certainly in great need," answered Caspian, "but it is hard to be sure we are at our greatest. Supposing there came an even worse need than we had already used it." "By that argument," said Nickelbrick, "your majesty will never use it until it is too late." "I agree with that," said Dr. Cornelius. "And what do you think, Trumpkin?" asked Caspian. "Oh, as for me," said the Red Dwarf, who had been listening with a complete indifference, "your majesty knows I think the horn, and that bit of broken stone over there, and your great King Peter, and your lion Aslan, are all eggs and moonshine. It's all one to me when your majesty blows the horn, and all I insist on is that the army is told nothing about it. There's no good raising hopes of magic help when, as I think, there's sure to be disappointed." "Then in the name of Aslan, we will wind Queen Susan's horn," said Caspian. "There is one thing, sire," said Dr. Cornelius, "that should perhaps be done first. We do not know what form of help will take. It might call Aslan himself from overseas, but I think it is more likely to call Peter the High King and his mighty consorts down from the high past. But in either case, I do not think we can be sure that the help will come to this very spot." "Never said a truer word," said Trumpkin. "I think," went on the learned man, "that they or he will come back to one or the other of the ancient places of Narnia. This, where we now sit, is the most ancient and most deeply magical of all, and here, I think, the answer is likeliest to come. But there are two others. One is Lantern Waste, upriver, west of Beaver's Dam, where the royal children first appeared in Narnia, as the records tell. The other is down at the river mouth, where their castle of Cair Paravel once stood. And if Aslan himself comes, that would be the best place for meeting him too, for every story says that he is the son of the great emperor oversea, and over the sea he will pass. I should like very much to send messages to both places, to Lantern Waste and the river mouth, receive them, or him, or it." "Just as I thought," muttered Trumpkin. "The first result of all this foolery is not to bring us help, but to lose us 2 fighters." "Who would you think of sending, Dr. Cornelius?" asked Caspian. "Squirrels are best for getting through enemy country without being caught," said Truffle Hunter. "All our squirrels, and we haven't many," said Nickelbrick, "are rather flighty. The only one I'd trust on a job like that would be Pattertwig." "Let it be Pattertwig then," said Caspian. And who for our other messenger? I know you'd go, Truffle Hunter, but you haven't the speed, nor you, Dr. Cornelius." "I won't go," said Nickelbrick. "With all these humans and beasts around, there must be a dwarf here to see that the dwarves are fairly treated." "Dimples and thunderstorms," said Trumpkin in rage. "Is that how you speak to the king? Send me, sir. I'll go." "But I thought you didn't believe in the horn, Trumpkin," said Caspian. No more I do, your majesty. But what's that got to do with it? I might as well die in a wild goose chase as die here. You're my king. I know the difference between giving advice and taking orders. You've had my advice, and now it is time for orders. "I will never forget this, Trumpkin," said Caspian. "Send for Pattertwig, one of you. And when shall I blow the horn?" "I would wait for sunrise, your majesty," said Dr. Cornelius. "That sometimes has the effect in operations of white magic." A few minutes later, Pattertwig arrived and had his task explained to him. As he was, like many squirrels, full of courage and a dash and energy and excitement and mischief, not to say conceit, he no sooner heard it than he was eager to be off. It was arranged that he should run for Lantern Waste, while Trumpkin made the shorter journey to the river mouth. After a hasty meal, they both set off with a fervent thanks and good wishes of the king, the badger, and Cornelius. And that's where we'll stop this evening. We've thank you everybody for joining in, and anybody who's asleep, I hope you keep having good dreams. I hope the rest of you peeps have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next Tuesday, or Sunday, my bad. Next Sunday, if you wanted to join in. And again, if anybody wanted to listen to the stories, you can also tune into Cathus's or Hero's YouTube, where he's uploading the VODs and stuff. Night, night, everybody.